Hello everyone. I just want to share some thoughts from Exodus chapter 3 and verses 1 through 4, and I'm going to be reading from the New King James Version. Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law. He led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. Moses looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Then Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Moses was born of Hebrew parents. He was raised in Pharaoh's house, but fled Egypt after murdering an Egyptian. His escape route took him across the river to the Midian desert, where he worked for his father-in-law, herding sheep. 40 years have passed now since Moses fled Egypt, and having spent every day of those years herding sheep in the desert, I think we can safely assume he was pretty familiar with the landscape. In fact, it's very likely that Moses had passed by that same bush many, many times before. It was, after all, just a bush. But that day, it was much, much more than just an ordinary bush. It was the object God used to speak to Moses. I must turn aside, he said. Everything hinged on Moses turning aside. He interrupted his daily routine to pay attention to the window God was wanting to show him and to hear what God was wanting to say through it. It was a choice he had to make. When the Lord saw that Moses turned aside to look, he made himself known to him, and Moses in turn positioned himself to hear what God wanted to say. And so we know that God revealed his plan and purpose for Moses. But we too must always be looking and listening if we are to see the windows God opens for us and what is spoken through those windows, in the midst of our activity choosing to turn aside. 40 years of being a shepherd, a nobody, seemingly insignificant and hidden, until that day when Kairos, which is God's time, and Chronos, which is time as we know it, when those two met, then heaven invaded earth. Our time is not always God's time. When we get to a place where it seems impossible, or we're not where we think we should be, and we're ready to put that dream or vision on the shelf, God steps in. And when he does, like Moses, let's turn aside and learn to look with more than just our eyes and listen with more than just our ears. I have a favourite quote from the poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God, but only he who sees takes off his shoes, the rest sit round and pluck blackberries. And as our beloved psalmist poet often said, Selah. Have a blessed day.